When philosophers and cognitive scientists get together to discuss such topics as intelligence, consciousness, or the mind, they routinely ignore a simple fact that is so obvious it is invisible. They all belong to the same species. Indeed, all the intellects that discourse, exchange, and debate in those venues sit atop the bodies of cognitively functional primates of the Homo sapiens species. The following caveat should thus precede every statement concerning cognition entertained at those all human events. Members of the human species consensually perceive that the mind is this, or intelligence is that, or the spirit is something else. However, this elemental information that all participants share a common complexion is so obvious it remains unsaid and is forgotten. It thus becomes easy for the assembled intellects to mistake their consensual subjective sensations as external entities and their common understandings as universal properties of cognition. This anthropocentric bias is not new. It is as old as the pyramids. For millennia, the learned have struggled to distinguish the reality their senses apprehend from the cognitive artifacts their brains generate. For centuries, philosophers sought to circumvent this incapacity to grasp reality directly by carefully describing and sharing with each other what they subjectively perceived, so that together they could form consensual understandings of their environment that were detached from their individual subjectivity. This traditional approach is inherently limited. At best, it replaces individual subjectivity with a consensual subjectivity that reflects those cognitive features that are common to the human species as a whole. The advent of programmable machines that can convert data into information and act upon it intelligently sheds a new light on cognition that supersedes the constructs based on these traditional approaches. Just as cameras relegated the practice of field sketching to a quaint artifact, the arrival of information processing technology renders the investigative methods of traditional philosophy obsolete. Today, software engineers routinely design synthetic systems that simplify and organize their sensory inputs into predictive models that are then used to generate intelligent behavior. The concepts arising from this technical activity describe with far greater accuracy the processes of cognition and their links with reality than scholarly opinions based on consensual perceptions. These master horsemen, living in the age of automobiles, will disdainfully disparage the simple and clear understanding of cognition that arises from modern system-based methods. This is too simple, they say, too commonsensical, too obvious. It cannot be the qualia, the access consciousness, or whatever elusive mental essence we can all feel and endlessly ponder. What has remained obscure for so many centuries cannot simply become simple today. So they keep trying to merge the horse with a car. Current attempts to craft a standard model of the mind exemplify the anthropocentric bias of these traditional methods. The mundane clarity emanating from the humble practice of computer programming reveals a simple yet superior understanding of the mind that can become a definitive reference in artificial intelligence, robotics, neurosciences, the cognitive sciences, psychology, and even, gasp, philosophy. Here then is that definitive model of the mind revealed by the tools and techniques of software engineering. Like any other autonomous systems, Humans determine their behavior by generating predictive representations of their environment from their internal states, sensory inputs, and external information. These representations are produced by discarding, simplifying, and organizing data to form cognitive constructs. These constructs are what humans perceive as reality. Some of these cognitive constructs are unique to an individual. Others are essential to all members of a species, allowing them to maintain a viable understanding of their environment. These essential constructs shared by all functional or sane individuals can be termed consensual cognitive representations. In these individuals, the cognitive processes that generate these essential constructs are beyond conscious control and override intellectual understanding. For example, a person looking at a continuum of hundreds of different light frequencies will see, cognitively, a few bands of rainbow colors. That person, having learned intellectually that he is looking at a continuum of frequencies, will still see the simplified bands of colors his brain cognitively generates. These consensual cognitive representations have been and are still misinterpreted as external realities, since all individual humans perceive them and agree on their existence. This delusion continues to motivate misguided research, such as attempts to create synthetic structures that superficially resemble organic brains to replicate the consensual cognitive representations the brains of the observers generate. A particular cognitive construct arises from this activity. These processes interpret as unified entities those mechanisms that animate the complex behavior of an organism, but are beyond analytical decomposition into interacting parts because their components are too numerous and their interactions too complicated. The term animate here is not limited to externally observed actions, but also to the internal states and events that condition and orient behavior. These synthesized cognitive entities are entirely distinct from the physical components that produce them, and the behavior they exhibit is completely different from the interactions taking place between these components. Specifically, the cognitive entity called a mind is radically different from neurons, and the behavior that mind generates is totally distinct from the interactions taking place between neurons. Conversely, human cognition will resist this simplification process with respect to those systems that can be decomposed into interacting parts. Some of the most important entities in a human's environment are its self, other humans, and animals. These organisms are commonly referred to as beings. The neural mechanisms that generate the behavior of these organic beings are their brains, extremely complicated webs of millions of neurons that are largely beyond analytical decomposition and comprehension. Consequently, humans cognitively perceive the mechanisms that animate the behavior of beings as unified entities. These simplifying processes are essential to human survival and are shared by all functional humans. Even if recent advances in neurology provide some insights on neurological interactions, as in the case of the rainbow, this essential cognitive simplification still takes place in spite of available intellectual information concerning neural structures. As a result, humans cognitively perceive beings as animated three-dimensional bodies constantly occupying a reality of transient flowing time. They perceive these bodies as physical things. However, the mechanisms animating these bodies are cognitively perceived as single, indivisible entities. This perception is essential to human functioning and survival and is thus automatic and consensual. This cognitive interpretation of the animating mechanisms of beings as unified entities in a constant state of existence over a period of time is what we call minds. These minds, defined here, do not exist as entities of an external environment. They are cognitive constructs occurring within the mental processes of an observer to structure and simplify a complicated reality. To rephrase, what humans traditionally perceive as minds are the simplified cognitive representations automatically generated by their brains of the mechanisms that animate the behavior of human beings and other high-order animals. Humans thus perceive a being cognitively as a system comprised of two radically different components, whose properties and modes of existence are completely distinct: a physical thing, the body, and a cognitive construct, its mind. This heterogeneous assemblage has perplexed mankind for at least 5,000 years. It has been the source of countless doctrines, debates, and theories in religion, philosophy, art, and psychology. Thanks to software engineering, this question has now been resolved. Currently, humans consensually perceive minds in themselves and other high-order animals. As artificial intelligence develops systems that are increasingly complex and capable of intelligent behavior, the question arises as to whether humans will also cognitively interpret the animating mechanisms of a synthetic system as a mind, and if so, under what circumstances. At this time, this is a conjecture, but it is not a conjecture of artificial intelligence. AI will develop increasingly advanced systems, but whether these are perceived as minds will not be decided by AI research, but by the psychologists that observe the humans as they interact with these artifacts. I personally believe this conjecture will indeed be validated. It underlines the mecasapiens architecture I created to implement synthetic consciousness. The conditions under which I hypothesize humans will cognitively perceive the animating mechanisms of a synthetic system as a mind are: the behavior is perceived as intelligent, meaning intentional and neither entirely predictable or random. The processes generating the behavior are not accessible to direct manipulation, partitioning, or analysis. And the internal communications linking these mechanisms with the devices they control are also inaccessible to direct manipulation. Assuming the conjecture that under certain conditions humans will perceive synthetic mechanisms as minds, we can now formulate a general, coherent, and definitive definition of the mind that is applicable to both biological organisms and synthetic systems. Definition: the term mind denotes the human cognitive representation of the mechanisms that animate the intelligent behavior of a system as a unified, indivisible entity in a constant state of existence over a period of time. It's that simple. A definitive model of the mind has been provided. A 5,000-year conundrum is resolved.